Why DAs struggle to validate. If you're unfamiliar with the dismissive avoidant, go back and look at some of my other TikToks, but we're going to talk about why they struggle with validation today. Leslie Wells, connection coach. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve, repair, and connect more deeply in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. So if you're unfamiliar with the dismissive avoidant, just know that in childhood, they essentially received emotional neglect. The caregivers, the parents around them, for the most part, either one or both, did not have high emotional IQ, and so therefore they were not able to model that or pour it into their child. So the DA grows up with essentially no modeling for emotional attunement, and therefore they do not know how to show up with things like validation, conflict, intimacy, closeness. So they essentially have emotional blinders on. They're sort of in a tunnel, and they have tunnel vision where everything is sort of geared inwardly, and they're looking at their own self, their own needs, whatever they kind of want. And truthfully, they're not very in touch with their own needs either, but they have a really hard time looking outwardly and getting curious about other people. And so one of the ways this shows up a lot of the time is when it comes to validating their partner's emotional experience. So first of all, what is validation? Validation is just understanding that somebody else's emotional experience and feelings are real for them. Feelings are not facts. They are not always true. In fact, a lot of times they're not true. However, they are signals that something is going wrong or something does not feel good to us that we need to then get curious about. They will lead us somewhere to our needs, our desires, our wants, things that are not working for us if we allow them to, okay? So they still are very real for us. Now we may have to go to this place where we're questioning them, we're questioning our thoughts behind them, we're really examining and exploring where these feelings are coming from and our emotions are coming from and whether or not they're valid or not. That's our work to do. But the point for somebody who is validating is just to be able to see that person and say, I see you, I hear the emotions you're talking about, I see you're having this experience, and I care. The feelings and emotions themselves are valid, although your interpretation and the meaning that you're drawing from these things are not necessarily valid and true and accurate and productive. So what I see a lot in my practice is I see this dynamic where we've got a dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant who leans very dismissive with a fearful avoidant or someone who leans very anxious. And so the biggest core need of a fearful avoidant is to be seen, heard, and deeply understood. And the problem is that the dismissive avoidant lacks the capacity to be able to do any of those things because they have emotional blinders on. So someone who deeply longs to be seen, heard, and understood definitely needs to be validated. And if they are not validated when they bring you something, it will just further escalate them. The reasons that dismissive avoidants struggle with validation is because they see it as if they validate somebody's experience, then they're saying that that person's right and that makes them wrong. And they already have this inner defectiveness wound, okay? So they already feel inadequate, they feel like a failure, they feel like they're not good enough, they feel like because of that, because of their inner defectiveness wound, that the relationship is going to be doomed anyway because they're never going to be able to show up and meet the needs for their partner. And so when it comes to a conflict, instead of them looking at that as a time to build intimacy and grow as a couple, they see it as a threat to the relationship. And so conflict really hits upon their core wound of their defectiveness wound. And so if they are wrong and you're right, that makes them feel more inadequate, more of a failure, more defective, and they just simply don't have the capacity to sit in that space. It feels too bad for them. They're also afraid that if they validate you, then you're going to believe that they're in agreement with you when they're not. And that also feels bad because if they agree with you, then essentially that means that they're bad, they're wrong, they've messed up. And that creates shame, and they don't have the capacity to sit in shame. Shame is dysregulating for all of us, for every insecure attachment style. But dismissive avoidants really have that shame close to the surface and can go into it very easily. So another reason they can't validate is because they feel like validating would be them accepting blame. Now, sometimes dismissive avoidants will appease just to move past the conflict, but they're not really owning their blame or their side of it, and they're not really taking full accountability. So in other words, they'll just kind of be like, oh yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. They'll just kind of want to move past it really quickly just to get through the conflict. But in reality, they're not truly owning any accountability, and really they're just wanting to not have to sit in that blame and shame and continue the conflict. So if you are a dismissive avoidant, being able to validate and then further that by actually reassuring someone, particularly if you have a fearful avoidant partner, is absolutely crucial to changing the dynamic of your conflict. If you really want to de-escalate a fearful avoidant, then hear their message And fearful avoidants do not always deliver their message in a very kind, good, loving way. So it's totally appropriate to set boundaries around that. But if you hear their message, instead of hearing disrespect, hearing criticism, hearing your own internal dialogue of, I'm not enough, I always get things wrong, I keep failing, like I'm never going to get this right. If you can hear their message, then you can speak into their message. You can validate them and their experience, whether or not you agree, and then you can further reassure them. So essentially, the fearful avoidant is coming to you saying, hey, I've got all this pain. I just need you to see me and hear me and let me know that you care, and then reassure me. Typically what happens instead in those moments is the partner who is dismissive avoidant, instead of showing up with validation, reassurance, and being able to sit in that moment, their inner defectiveness wound is triggered, and so they go into typically a flight or a freeze response. They simply cannot hold capacity to sit in conflict and to sit into a space where they are experiencing a lot of shame or a lot of uncomfortable feelings because they've let their partner down. It's really difficult for them when they feel like they have disappointed or let their partner down, or they feel like they're being criticized. That typically will put them into a trauma response. And so what happens is they withdraw, they pull away, they go into a disassociative state, and then the fearful avoidant or their anxious partner typically then feels completely unseen, unheard, and abandoned, and either they escalate or they just kind of quit and they go into their own avoidant side where they just pull away themselves and sort of shut themselves off. So it's really important for dismissive avoidants to be able to learn to validate. So you can do this, again, even if you do not agree with someone. So that may sound something like this. Hey, I can see that you really feel strongly about this. I don't feel as strongly about this, but I can see it's really important to you. So tell me how I can show up in this for you. The goal is to simply validate their experience and their feelings, their emotions, what's going on for them without necessarily agreeing. But you want to make sure that they feel like you've got them in this moment, even if you see things differently. Another way is you can simply say, I didn't mean to upset you when I did this. I had no idea it would be perceived that way, but I can see that I did upset you and I'm sorry. Or I may not fully understand your feelings, but I can see that it's deeply impacting you and that upsets me. And people are going to experience things differently. So the same scenario, each of you could draw different meaning from it and have a totally different experience. So it's actually completely appropriate to say, hey, I experienced this completely differently than you, which is why I don't feel the same way. But I can totally understand that the way you experience that is very painful, and I want to show up in that for you. Or if you're a dismissive avoidant, you can speak to what's really happening for you. The truth is, if you're a dismissive avoidant, it's very difficult for you to sit in the space of other people's emotions or feelings. You don't know what to do with that. That's something that has to be learned and taught, and something that you have to do with different tools. And that's a big part of what I do in my coaching program. So you can speak with vulnerability and honesty about that to your partner in these moments. And you can say something along the lines of, hey, I really don't know how to handle your big emotions right now. I don't know how to show up in that for you. It's kind of a difficult place for me, but I would like to go ahead and know, like, what can I do to make this better? How can I show up in this for you? Sometimes it's literally just sitting with them in that space without having to fix, without having to make those emotions go away, without having to actually just talk about it or admit anything, or literally all you have to do sometimes is just sit in the space. So it's a good question to find out when you're validating, how can I show up in this for you? What do you need from me? What feels good to you right now? So just know, if your dismissive avoidant partner is having a really hard time validating, you're very frustrated with that, and you feel like you're not being seen, heard, or understood, that is a them problem. It is a capacity issue, and they typically go into a trauma response, a flight, or a freeze if it gets really bad. And so it has nothing to do with you. It's not that they do not want to show up for you in those moments. They do. They deeply care. A lot of times they're just frozen because they're terrified that they're going to actually get it wrong. So if you're a dismissive avoidant, understand that validating someone does not mean that you agree, does not mean that you are taking all of the blame. It does not mean you're inadequate, defective, or a failure. It simply means your partner needs for you to say something to let them know that you understand that they are having an experience, they're having some emotions around something, and they need you to say that you see them, you hear them, and that you care.